Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it is going to be the turn of the American singer, songwriter, also author and director. It's the one and only Adele Bertei, who I spoke to find out more about life, love and poetry. But more importantly, her new book that has just come out titled Twisted. This is on Z Publishing, Z-E. Which was famous in the late 70s and 80s, the American label, which brought out lots of exciting post-punk sounds and has gone into publishing. The book, Twisted, documents Adele's early life from 1955 to 1972 and has this is the first part of a trilogy which is going to come up to the current day. And also, just to say, she wrote a book a couple of years ago called Why Labelle Matters, which is about the cultural and musical progress achieved by Patti Labelle and the Bluebelles in the 1960s. And that's also available from all good bookshops. There's a lot to think about and talk about. So this is the interview. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat that we edit out, we get down to that reason, all the creative flow that Adele is on at the moment. This decade, she's been very busy, and this is her response to that fascinating question. Anyway, Adele, it's over to you.
I am, in terms of writing, when I was young, I was too busy experiencing everything to have the discipline to actually sit in a chair and write every day. It's such a solitary enterprise being a writer. But I just I've always written, but never really disciplined myself to produce some a complete work.
Yes, so, absolutely. Because your first book you did, which was about 10 years ago, was it? Yes, 10 years ago. You did Peter and the Wolves, didn't you?
It wasn't that long ago. It was only about 3 years ago, actually.
Oh, was it? I thought it was published in 2013.
Yes, but it wasn't properly published. I did a first version of it out to my Kickstarter patrons.
I've got it.
Yeah, yes. But it wasn't for sale. And then Smogville Books picked it up, and we did a proper version of it to sell to the public. Yeah.
And then for the next 2 years ago, you did Why Patti Labelle Matters. How did that project come about?
It came about precisely because whenever I would mention the word Labelle, the name Labelle, people automatically thought Patti Labelle, just as you did.
Yes.
And no, but it's not an odd occurrence at all, David. I mean, that's what everybody thought. And Patti Labelle, yes, has that name, but it came from a group of 3 women, Nona Hendricks, Sarah Dash, and Patti Labelle, who basically did the song Lady Marmalade and came out with records in the early 70s, mid 70s that were absolutely revolutionary as a trio. Patti was a singer, but their vocal triumvirate was absolutely scorching and just amazing. Their 3 voices together. And I thought, I have to write about these women because they've kind of been lost to history as a trio.
Yes.
And everybody thinks of Patti immediately when you say Labelle. So it was an homage to the group that really broke all paradigms of the girl group, bouffant hairdos and prom dresses and all that,
Yes, absolutely. And writing that project, because I know there was a huge amount of books in that series, including Karen Carpenter and various other people. Was that quite an interesting discipline to sort of sit down and write about, something that wasn't sort of so kind of directly connected to your life, even though I know from the book you talk about how sort of important that music was.
Yeah. I absolutely love doing research. Thank God for Rock's Back Pages and places where you can just look up all the information you need, I love doing research. And I actually, the next book that I'm going to work on after this last memoir, I'm sick of writing memoir at this point, is a historical fiction novel. So, it's all about the different voice you find for each book. And
Yes.
Yeah.
Which brings us to Twisted, you're the first part of your trilogy here, really, isn't it? And
Yes.
I have to
Yes.
say, it's quite an extraordinary read and quite quite amazing and honest, but quite sort of at times quite like, wow, that's quite a heavy moment. I must go and have a break and have a cup of coffee and digest it, because it was kind of, pages did leave it, like absolutely exhausted, emotionally drained. So writing it must have been, you had to live it. So Twisted, this is from Charles Dickens, isn't it? Oliver Twist. God, I hope I got that right.
Yeah, it is. And also my mother's name was Kitty, her nickname, Catherine, but Kitty.
Right.
And she was also called Kitty Twist because of Jane Fonda's movie Walk on the Wild Side. I don't know if you ever saw it, but a brilliant film that Jane Fonda was in, and her nickname in that film was Kitty Twist, her character name.
Right. And the book, just for those who haven't read it, it's kind of narrated by a person called Maddie Twist, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
What was the reason for writing it in a slightly third person? I kind of could imagine why, but just to explain, just in case I've got that wrong. But yes.
Right. Yes. Well, as you know, David, because you read the book, it was a pretty hard journey to go back in, through the war zones, I call them, of my youth. And I thought like creating a character would give me a bit of armor, a little bit of protection, because I wanted to write it in the first person as the kid going through it, because I know that I'm not alone in that experience. And so many kids go through such intense traumas, and women go through such, sexual violence and all of these things. And I wanted to not just write a misery memoir, as they're called,
No.
but to also show how I was able as a kid to keep pushing on and transmuting those experiences and being able to, just find the good in other people and keep going despite the tragedies, and how to turn it some kind of magic,
Some type of magic, indeed.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, magic. That wasn't the word that sprung to mind when I read it. But it was
sprung to your mind, David.
Yeah, because your parents, just to explain who your parents in the book are quite amazing characters, aren't they? I mean, you couldn't literally make them up. You've got your father, he's referred to as Big Al, isn't he, in the book?
Yes.
And mother is Kitty. So Big Al. So what's just describe Big Al to us for those listening?
Big Al was an Italian immigrant, was picked on as a boy because he couldn't speak English in school, and that deterred him from wanting to learn anything, because he didn't want to be bullied. And he grew up in a working class family that wasn't very educated. His brother was a gangster, and he wanted to be like his brother. He wanted to be, a mob guy, and he was not good at it. He was also very abusive. He didn't support his family and was abusive to my mother. So, it was very difficult for my mother, having 3 children, being stuck in the role of a housewife with an abusive husband. And when I say magic, I have to go talk about my mom for a minute.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, because she basically chose, I think people sometimes choose madness as a way out of an ordinary life that they feel confined in.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a combination of, it can be chemical, it can be alcohol and drugs, it can be just the confinement of abuse, really. And with my mother, and I think I try to make this clear in the book, is that she could be incredibly abusive. She was mentally ill. She could be abusive, but at the same time, she had the most extraordinary imagination. And I loved that about her. I mean, she had oral hallucinations. She would sit on a bed and wave her hands in the air and hear an entire orchestra and bring me into that oral hallucination, So in some ways, I was able to transmute the darkness of my mother's supposed affliction and turn it into a badge of courage to go forward in my life, to take risks. Yeah.
Wow, that's something. So you grew up in Ohio, didn't you? And this first part, is that, because I've written it down and I might have written it wrong. Is it from 1955 to 1973? This is the first part of it. So yeah, yes. And what was quite interesting with it, but your dad is also a racist, isn't he?
Yes. So yes. I mean, all the working class Italians in Ohio at the time were racists. It was a very polarizing time. Italian men would blame Black men on stealing their jobs. And it was just awful, like the names that were called, and just my mother was the opposite of that. She really felt a lot of compassion for, the Black experience in America at that time, civil rights, and watching Black people be beaten and chased by dogs. And I mean, this was on our television sets every day, so it was a really polarizing time. And yeah.
So with the sort of the mafia connection, because, having a certain interest, we kind of got the New York, there's Chicago, and eventually Las Vegas. So is your family, on your father's, father and brother, were they just kind of small town sort of thugs who didn't quite ever make the big time?
Well, my uncle was in prison. My uncle Caesar was imprisoned for probably about 30 to 40 years of his life. So he was a little bigger time than my dad. My dad could never make it to made man status. You know what I mean? He began the numbers runner, taking bets out from the racetrack, picking bets up from local bars and taking them to the racetrack. But I think what happened, and I don't know this for sure, but he had 2 of his fingers were cut off clean at the first knuckle on his right hand.
Right.
And, I had heard that he got his fingers cut off by the mob because they caught him with his hand in the mob's cookie jar when he was like, money from them,
It's an occupational hazard, isn't it? Because no, just casual. But yeah, because it was kind of interesting, because you mentioned in the book about getting your teeth fixed, and it was kind of on a bet that your dad had won, that he got the money for you to have various teeth removed and having them sorted. So it gives you some sort of idea of you were living sort of hand to mouth really at this stage, weren't you? There was a lot of poverty and a lot of kind of, it's a very grim, it's quite a grim childhood. There's nothing kind of cushy, is there, or all sort of comfortable and fluffy about this?
Nothing fluffy, nothing comfortable except for books and music and poetry.
And there, yes, because in the book, I mean, you mentioned, the Beat like Jerry and the Pacemakers, and also people like Edgar Allan Poe and sort of poems. And also the interesting thing, you're sort of drawn a lot to the, I suppose, is it the Catholic faith and the church and the sort of iconography of Jesus and the saints? So this is kind of something that pulls you in from quite an early age, isn't it?
It is, because of the iconography always depicts saints and Jesus and various Catholic entities as with these expressions of extreme suffering, but at the same time extreme ecstasy, and that was always incredibly compelling to me. And also being in a Catholic church, because I was going through so much in my childhood. Going to church with my Italian grandmother was a kind of a sacred space. It was sanctuary for me. I mean, still to this day, I love churches, the architecture of churches and the atmosphere, because it's imbued with so much prayer and hope and despair and all of it. And those atmospheres just always make me deeply contemplative,
Yeah,
I have problems with the Catholic Church, that's for sure. But
I would imagine, actually, because is it right that you were actually, there was a part, I think it's chapter 4, where you sort of find out that actually you were born out of wedlock, weren't you?
Yes,
So
exactly.
was that quite a big thing in your life? Did you sort of suddenly, I think that was one of those moments at school, wasn't it, where you were suddenly being taunted?
I was taunted for being queer when I was in junior high school, but in terms of the bastard moniker, I was told that, but I didn't really think my father, Big Al, was not my father. I believed him to be my real father. I didn't find out until 3 years ago that my real father was another man. So that's another story for another day. But yeah.
Oh, wow, that's kind of thrown me because I thought
it was through a DNA test. Have you ever had a DNA test, David?
No, but no, I should do. So wait a
Maybe
minute. So when you were writing this book, Big Al is definitely your father, isn't it? In your mind, you've written this like he is your father. But then 3 years ago, you find that actually Big Al, after all this horrendous hell that he put you through, isn't your father.
No, he wasn't my father. My mother had an affair with a brilliant young Sicilian guy, and I found out through a DNA test that he was my biological father.
Oh my goodness!
So I would say, to anyone listening, unless you want to really find out some surprises, maybe stay away from the DNA tests.
Yes, because there's kind of endless kind of moments of like your dad really beating your mother up and having to witness this, or Big Al beating your mother up, and also burning the house down as well, which is again, this is kind of early on in the book, and you're still living at home at this stage, aren't you? You haven't sort of been taken away to a foster home, which again, it's like each chapter seems to be like Dante's Inferno of Hell of how far.
The 7 circles of hell.
Yes, it does. It does. Like there is not much bright, because then whenever there's an element of optimism, it's followed by something that isn't quite so good, isn't it? Sort of these kind of issues that sort of keep sort of kind of rearing their head, because you could then go, is it Willard House? And you live with a foster family who all seem perfectly lovely, and the father's John, isn't he? Who sort of is a drummer and gives you lots of kind of, I don't know, encouragement at this stage.
That was the second foster home. Yeah, they were really, really lovely people. And I felt so at home. The first foster home was a disaster. The second one, I really did feel at home and encouraged and safe. And then my foster sister found out that I was romancing with another girl. And in the 60s and 70s, you could not be authentically queer at all. If you were found out or discovered to be gay, you were in for a boatload of trouble.
Yes.
And
it was illegal in this country in the 60s. So what was it like was it any different in America?
I don't know that it was illegal, but it was certainly taboo. It was certainly something that would get you ostracized, beaten up. Some people lost their lives over it. I mean, there was so much homophobia. Everyone was in the closet. I mean, even Liberace was in the closet at that point.
Yes, this is quite amusing, isn't it? I know, and all the like, the manager of the Beatles. I mean, they all had to be so careful because it was still this kind of aspect of living a secret life. So when did you realize that you were gay at that stage? Because you're still quite young, aren't you?
Yeah, around the time that I was 12, 13, I noticed that I kind of liked girls more than boys, that I like whenever I would hear a love song on the radio, it would always be me in the boy position romancing some girl. And it just felt very natural to me, although I knew that in the eyes of society, I was going to be condemned for it. But it was I was discovering this as my nature and having my first love affair with a girl at 13.
Which is good. Which is fun. Yeah, because there was also this little bit, and I think this is kind of a bit later on, when there's a really sad and beautiful moment, but heartbreaking, of sort of, is it John who tells you that, explaining how your mother is, and then sort of tells you that she does love you, even though she can't kind of express it as a sort of, in a way that feels normal, or you can kind of relate to it.
Yeah, I had a benefactor, a mentor that was a friend of my mother's. His name was Hugh Harris. and he worked for Nassau. And when I was being emancipated from my reformatory, he helped me get my first apartment, and he was very helpful in my life. And at that moment, my mother was in a mental institution, in and out all the time, receiving shock treatments. She had a really difficult life, incredibly difficult.
Yes.
And part of this book has been a forgiveness journey about all the people that I encountered that were hurtful, and a systematic look at how society creates cruelty in people when they're not allowed to be their authentic selves, or are denied creativity, and how people turn cruel is a big theme throughout this book, I believe.
Well, it does, because then, I think it's kind of a little bit later on in the book, there is this sort of the most horrendous chapter, which is when you get locked up by Albert, which is kind of like with the gun, and you're sort of basically a prisoner and also raped as well. So, I mean, that's quite the most, shocking kind of chapter I've read for a long time. I mean, when you were writing that, what was the process that you had to sort of try and go through to put that to page? Because obviously you're a young person at this stage, incredibly vulnerable. You've had this really difficult life and not had that many breaks. And then, you sort of meet this guy and you've got this idealistic idea of hippies, and, this person looks and sounds all okay. And then he takes you away. And then before you know it, you're being set up, and the most horrendous experience happens, really.
Mm-hmm. I felt it was important to write about it, and it was hard to write about, but important to write about also from the point of view of how, like, veterans get tossed away by our system, the American system, and how abusive it is to send men off to war to kill and be killed, and that rage that they have could be taken out on a woman. Not that I'm not saying I'm not approving it by any means, but it makes sense of why they would do that. And I also wanted to talk about the fact that it's called autoscopy when you leave your body during a traumatic incident. That happened to me, and it was an extremely wild experience to kind of be out of your body, disconnected, disassociated, and going somewhere else. It's kind of like, I say this often, is that people say magical thinking isn't a great thing for adults, but I think it's very helpful when you're going through trauma.
Yes.
To go somewhere else, to leave your circumstances,
And sort of not just, that particular moment, but an awful lot of this book. I mean, when you sort of see yourself and see photographs of yourself, you must, and then sort of write in the narrative, how do you sort of not sort of just break down, because it is so, so many kind of moments in this book, where, unfelt fortunate incidences, even people at school, all those kind of things, but everything seems to be so magnified in your life. It's just really, I just wondered how you were coping with that yourself, writing this memoir.
Well, in the midst of these tragedies and the violence and everything, you end up thinking pretty deeply about human nature and why people commit these horrible atrocities. And I guess you could say that I really, yes, it was hard to write, but I had to think about what saved me from going under, from letting these types of tragedies destroy me in my life, or destroy my hope in a future.
Yes.
And it had to do really with just a kind of alchemy, a way of transmuting darkness into light. And remembering those rays of light that I was able to grab onto to carry me through to a different circumstance in my life.
Yes.
And I always would find the best in people to help me. I mean, everybody's writing these days about stoicism online.
Yes.
I guess I was pretty stoic when I was a kid. I just felt I had to keep pushing on that there had to be something better, you know?
Yes, absolutely. And there is a little bit of a, when you went then after that horrendous experience, you go to another school, don't you? Mary Crest School for Girls.
Mary Crest, yes.
Is this a salvation for you at this stage? Was that a
It
sort
was,
of a,
yeah, it was sanctuary. We're so used to hearing stories and cliches about the mean nun. You know, nuns are horrible, mean people, and I didn't experience that initially, because this was a convent school. It was the same type of school run by the same order of sisters that ran the Magdalen laundries in Ireland.
right?
In America, they were far less draconian than the Magdalen laundries, but um, I felt sanctuary there, and I loved the order of it, you know, because as a kid, my life was so chaotic. I was being thrown from one situation to the next and went through a lot of darkness, dark situations. And here I was in this beautiful space with these very, very kind nuns. And of course, I would find out things later in my stay there that they weren't always kind. It'd also be pretty cruel, but for a while there, I really appreciated that sense of sanctuary and safety.
Yes, until you went to see the therapist, and the therapist was completely bonkers, wasn't he?
Oh, completely. And while I was writing the book, I went to Cleveland and went to the Cleveland Public Library and looked him up in microfiche,
I'm not
right?
surprised. He's you must have wondered if he's gone to prison.
I don't think he went to prison, but there were articles about him, going from job to job and eventually trying to set up a program for disturbed girls at a motel. At a motel. I mean, this guy was really dodgy.
Yes.
I've yet to find out some more about him. But yeah, that was a very disturbing experience with him.
Yes, because then, I mean, obviously at this stage, this is coming to the sort of the end of the 60s period, I'm gathering. And so you must have started sort of culturally becoming more interested, because you mentioned quite a lot of music and musicals and James Brown in the book. And also there's Andy Warhol appears in your life as well. So things you've started to sort of develop quite a lot at this stage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Not so much in Marycrest because we weren't really allowed to know what was going on out in the world. But once I got to Blossom Hill and then the second reformatory and started being able to read more and find out what was going on in the world, the world started to open up. And then
Yes.
when I was emancipated, discovered Andy Warhol and a whole new world of art and music that I had not known until then.
And was music, because I know you mentioned, Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly and musicals and obviously the world of Oliver, but did you start to feel quite drawn towards the arts at this stage? Did you sort of, the musical instrument and the voice?
Yeah, I loved music from the very first day I could hear it. My grandmother was a honky-tonk and stride piano player during the Depression. She played in speakeasies, and she was Irish, and her mother came over from Ireland, and the piano was so much a part of my mother's and my life. And I started out sitting on the piano bench next to my grandma, hearing her rhythms, and she was an amazing singer as well.
Yes.
So music was in my blood. It was, bone deep for me and continued to be a life raft throughout my life.
And writing poetry as well, because there's another kind of moment where, is it that you've written some poetry and then somebody has kind of destroyed it and you've sort of feel like you want to kill yourself at this stage?
Yeah, I think that was the only time I actually felt that despondent about living. was when my poetry was destroyed by a foster sister. I don't want to go too into detail because I want people to read the book, but
Sorry. Yes.
yeah, that's okay. That's okay. No, but yeah, it was my most despondent moment.
Yes, I mean it is quite. So with the book, it's split into sort of three parts, isn't it? With the sort of waltz into the GI blues. So just
Yeah.
how did you all decide how to sort of finish this first part of the trilogy?
The first book I wrote, the first memoir I wrote was called Peter and the Wolves. And it was about being discovered as a singer in Cleveland in 1975, and my relationship with Peter Laughner, who became like my brother. And Peter Laughner was one of the instigators of Perubu, a brilliant, brilliant musician. And I finished that book before I finished Twist, although Twist precedes that story.
Yes.
And now I'm working on No New York, which is about getting to New York in 1977 and joining the Contortions and the whole scene in New York. And it goes through to music in London and, being in the corporate music business as opposed to the underground, no
Yeah.
waves.
Are you
Yeah.
are you sort of amazed how you managed to survive? I mean, and not become slightly, but quite bitter. A lot of times, you've never played the victim, have you?
Not really. I mean, I did. Well, that's not true. I mean, I drank and drugged for many years of my life after I got out of the reformatory, and it wasn't until my 30s that I actually stopped. And it was a way of covering up all of the shame and the hurt and the pain of my childhood. I drank it away. I drugged it away. When I stopped that and went into therapy and started being a sober individual and learning how to live a life
Yes.
amongst others, and I started to drastically change my life, and I've been sober ever since, and it's really helped me.
Yes.
I see identity as very dynamic. It's not static. It's always a process of becoming. Like for instance, I'm not Maddie Twist anymore. Nor am I the girl that met Peter Laughner. I'm always in the process of becoming, and that's about energy always being in flux and always being curious about life.
Yes. And with the book, it's on Z Publishing or Books. This
Yeah.
is the record label, isn't it? Who's diversified into publishing now, which is just, it must be quite a nice holistic kind of circle, really, from the sort of the no wave New York scene to suddenly writing a book, which is kind of on that particular, or connected to that label.
Yeah, that's a very beautiful way of putting it. It's like a holistic circle. Michael Zilka had Z Records back in 77, 78, and he was the person who put me into the studio. The first time I was ever in a proper recording studio was due to Michael Z Records, was with the Contortions and James White and the Blacks. And then now that he has Z Publishing, he's my publisher in America, and he's just wonderful, and I'm very grateful that he was able to be brave enough to put this book out right now too.
Yes. I mean,
Mm.
it is it's, I mean, I've only just had the PDFs, which is always a bit more tricky to read than a
Yes,
book.
there's a lot of mistakes in the PDF.
But no, but at the same time, it is just absolutely riveting. And I do know, because a lot of people have been writing their books from sort of slightly my generation and your generation, and they've opened up a whole narrative that has not been there before, which I think
Mm.
has been just really interesting. And a lot of people are reappraising things. I mean, we've had a bit on the 60s and with feminism, but then these aspects that you brought in, like these
Mm.
Vietnam sort of veterans who have become, were very disturbed and were walking time bombs. But then what do you expect when they've taken so many drugs and LSD that they don't know who they are and they're being abandoned, and obviously I just, it's not good. So it has just kind of opened up a whole sort of a wave of kind of talking about things and how people's lives have been, because we just would never have experienced some of the things that you would have gone through. I'm not saying I experienced them, obviously, but just that, like, wow, because we hear, your music, we know your sort of, the band moments, but not your childhood. And I think that just is kind of boggling, because it's like on another level, which is like, you do feel suddenly quite lucky that one didn't have that, what you had to go through, if that doesn't sound weird.
Well, it's, what I learned, and, in terms of Vietnam veterans, any veterans really, I have such compassion and empathy for them. Being told to kill people that you don't really understand why, or being in the, marching into the jaws of death. And what I learned is, we don't have power over the events in our lives, and that doesn't, it's not a contest of who has more trauma than the other, really. We all have our traumas and our hurts, and we don't have power over these events, but we do have power over making choices and how we feel about those events.
Yes.
And I think that's an important part of the book as well, is acknowledging that, and that's being an adult. That's, being responsible. When you're a child, you have no power. You're basically a victim of your circumstances. When you're an adult, you have the power.
Yeah, but that's quite an interesting one, because I've learned to let go of things when I've taken responsibility for what I, the choices I made, like possibly friendships, as an example.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you can do that to a degree as an adult, but as a child, it's quite difficult to do that, because you're thinking, well, I was just tiny. I just had nothing. I can't go on one of those kind of workshops that sort of, it sort of fills you with all these kind of cliches and think, yes, because you're thinking, no, I was 10, or I was 8, I was 13.
Right.
I mean, it's very little to take. You can't take that much responsibility, even though you might have made a choice of who you were friendly with at school. But I mean, that's kind of quite difficult, isn't it?
It is, and it gets into the whole idea of attachment theory. I don't know if you've ever read about attachment theory, but the way we attach to other human beings, it's all based on what we went through with our parents as children. Like, for instance, I would probably be called severe avoidant attachment personality. But these are things you learn to work out, and that's where the magic comes in a way. You know what I mean? Because my childhood, I had to make a certain magic out of it. And will it maybe help someone to read it, or to have more courage about facing certain things in their lives that were hard? I don't know. I mean, I would love that to happen. I mean, that's part of why I wrote it. Also, as LGBTQ history, I don't think a lot of our community, the gay community, has read stories like this about what we actually went through. As queer people in the 60s and 70s, it was rough. I mean, I had a dear friend, Mona, in the book that was murdered. Yeah, I don't talk about that in the book because it happened way after the
right. Yes, because I know. Yes, Mona does appear a lot towards the end, doesn't she?
Yeah, and Mona was a drag queen and very intelligent, wonderful, but was in love with a supposedly straight guy with a family, who she was seeing romantically, but it didn't work out in her favor. He ended up murdering her. So this is a lot of what we went through as young people in the 60s and 70s, and then also again fighting on the front of AIDS, and in ACT UP, and all of the struggles that we've gone through, so that LGBTQ people today can be their authentic selves and be their identities, the identities that they choose.
Yes.
I think it's important in that aspect too, that we know our history.
Amazing. Yeah, absolutely. Because there was a horrible bit where you get into, is it a fight with Kitty? And then, I mean, you end up in, is it hospital at this stage, going back into the book?
No, I don't. I never ended up in a hospital.
But did you have a fight? Was there a horrible scene in the book?
There's a fight scene with my foster sister.
That's it.
Yeah, when it's discovered that I'm seeing another girl, and she beats me up pretty badly, and I run away.
Yes, I know. It's it's quite amazing. It's been an amazing read, and I just think it's an amazing book. Just because of curiosity, what happens to your mum, by the way?
My mother had a very lonely life. She was institutionalized off and on throughout her life. She had shock therapy. She lived alone. It was very hard for me to have a relationship with her because she wanted me to take care of her, and I did not have the means to do that. And because she had abandoned me, of course, it was really hard for me to want to be in her life. And retrospectively, I wish I had have spent more time with her before she passed,
Yes.
But yeah, she had a very, very lonely life. And this book is really a way of telling her, this is all the stuff that happened to me, but I made it through, because I believe in ghosts, David. I believe that there are benevolent ghosts in our lives that want the best for us. And that
was it a bit like Wings of Desire, the film, where you just felt like she was there when you were writing it?
Yes, for sure. And my grandmother was there.
Yes, your grandmother is quite extraordinary. So then what happens to Big Al?
Big Al. I didn't keep in touch with him either. He remarried, had a child with another wife, and just kind of faded into the background. I didn't really stay in touch with him. I have a half brother who's a lovely, lovely guy.
Yes.
But then we found out that he's not really my half brother biologically, although I do have, a bit of a relationship with him. So Big Al, when did he pass away? Probably about 5 or 6 years ago.
Blimey, the circle's vaguely completed on that one.
Yes.
Oh, there's a lot that you've just done so much processing, haven't you? That's just amazing. That's just so just going forward then, you've still got the next 2 books coming out. Did you say the second one is going to be the one that you wrote a few years ago, Peter and the Wolves?
Yes, Peter and the Wolves. That's number 2.
And is that going to come out on Z Books as well?
It is actually. Michael's he's going to publish the entire trilogy, which is wonderful. But I'm actually doing the 3rd book with Faber and Faber in London. The No New York book, it will be with Faber and Faber in London and Europe and the rest of the world. And then Michael will have it for the US. So I'm excited to be working with Faber too. That's going to be wonderful.
Oh, yes, because Why Labelle Matters was on Faber, wasn't it?
No, unfortunately, they didn't pick it up. I don't know why.
I think they picked up some of those, didn't they?
They did. They picked up 3 books, but hey, it isn't over yet. Maybe they will publish it.
They should do.
So it hasn't had a world rights acquisition yet. So hoping for that, because it's a very British book. I mean, I write about Vicky Wickham and Simon Napier Bell and all the people that were involved in Labelle's journey in London. That was a very important period for them.
Yes, and it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, but it's also kind of interesting in the book because you really are part of that kind of generation who love the classics, aren't you, as well? The authors of those kind of times. Did you always have that kind of passion? And for people like Hayley Mills as well.
Yeah. Oh, are you kidding? That was one of my favorite films. I loved Hayley Mills. I loved the Brits. I loved the Mersey Beat. I loved bands like Jerry and the Pacemakers and the Animals. And I was always enamored of British culture, pop culture in the 60s.
Yes.
Yeah. And also, of course, the classics like Edgar Allan Poe and Dickens and the great poets, Shelley and Keats. And
My God, so poetic. So,
Yeah.
and just on that sort of creative front, you also released a couple of singles as well recently, as well, haven't you?
I did, yeah, yeah. I wrote a protest song called American Elegy, and that's out on all streaming platforms, Spotify and Apple and wherever else. And I just released something called Savage is the Wolf, which is coming out with remixes in late April. It's a dance track primarily, but has a lot of lyrics, which is unusual for most dance tracks. Savage,
Yes.
Savage is the Wolf, the single version is out, also is streaming now on Apple
Yeah.
and Spotify and all, Amazon and all the rest. Yeah.
I was giving it a listen because you did Black Box Disco, Savage is the Wolf, American Elegy.
American Elegy, yeah. Black Box Disco is from a soundtrack that I did back in the 80s, like 81 or something.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Well, look, this has been fantastic. Well, thank you ever so much for your time, Adele.
Thank you,
And
David.
yeah, and amazing. I'm really looking forward because I must admit I have never been able to get a copy of the other book, Peter and the Wolves.
Peter and the Wolves?
No, it's quite hard to get hold of, isn't it? I think.
It's a little hard, but it won't be for too much longer, hopefully.
Which will be brilliant. So I'm really looking forward because that'll be the 70s into the 80s, and that'll be a fascinating period. And yes, you'll be that'll be good. But look, thank you ever so much. This has been amazing and lovely to meet you. And take care.
Yeah, you too. And are we signing off right now?
We can, yes, we can. I can hit pause. There you go.
Okay. No, I just wanted to ask you where you're located in London.
Oh, yes. So I'm actually just north of London, Norwich, basically. It's like 100 miles north. But I must come, it'd be great to sort of come and see you. Are you doing a reading in London?
Yeah, I'm doing a reading at Foyles. I don't know the date yet, but I can shoot you an email when I know more about, where I'll be and when I'll be reading, etc. if you'd like.
It'll be amazing. And have you been touring a lot with this book around America?
Yeah, a few places in America. I just did New York with Nan Golden. Do you know who Nan Golden is, the photographer?
Yes.
Yes. She and I, we were girlfriends way back in the day, and she's got that brilliant documentary about her life out now. It's called All the Beauty and the Bloodshed.
Yes.
And yeah, you should see that. I think you'd enjoy that.
I will.
It's streaming everywhere. So.
Well, it's quite interesting because there was a couple of people who put out photographic books. There's a woman called, is it Julia Gorton, who's put out this amazing book.
Yeah.
And I did an interview with her quite recently about her book that she's brought out called, I don't know what it's called. No something.
Yeah, I know. I can't remember what it's called. She sent me a copy because there's a few pictures of me in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's been great that people have been going through that archive to sort of put together. And there's been a lot of films made as well from bands of the 70s and 80s who are really tiny, but then they've just had this kind of cultural importance to them. So that's been good. So I've kind of enjoyed it as a sort of a fan. But yes, well, I'll keep my eye out for your London date, and that'd be amazing. So that will be May. Well, at least it'll be warm and very light. So, and hopefully you get a chance to visit a few churches and cathedrals, because frankly, the UK is full of cathedrals and churches and castles. So
what's your favorite cathedral in London?
I suppose it would be, is it St. Paul's? One of those. Yeah, I mean we've got two in Norwich, which are amazing cathedrals. But every city seems to have got a cathedral of some description and an amazing history. I mean, to be honest, I love visiting churches because they're very old, but the sort of the graves, the sort of stained glass, the kind of the slabs, the stories behind these people are just fascinating. So yes, you can spend. I think Norwich has got some ridiculous amount of churches. I think they might have got a church for every day of the year or something. There's just a lot of chures. They got carried away, I think, and we've got all the stately homes and all the kind of kings and queens. I mean, it's great because it's very small, but it's packed with history and sort of, all that kind of the Roman invasion, the Vikings, all that kind of stuff. So, so I hope you get a chance to tour. And then are you going to be going to Europe as well?
So far it's only a UK tour. I'll be in Dublin, I'll be in Glasgow, London, and Brighton so far.
It'll be
So
so exciting.
it will be fun. Yeah.
So do you sort of go on your own and then just get picked up by the PR person and then just taken around?
In some instances, I mean, I lived in London for a few years during the 80s, and I have a lot of friends there. So I'll be staying with a friend when I'm there. And I have a friend in Dublin as well, filmmaker friend, and don't have any friends in Brighton, I'm afraid. But in the places where I don't have friends, the PR people will hook me up with hotels and whoever is sponsoring the events,
Yeah. Oh God, I hope you have a fantastic time.
Thank
And
you.
I'm sure you will. But yes, and I'm really looking forward to getting a hard copy as well. It'll be nice. I love the cover, by the way. I think the cover is so beautiful.
Oh, thank you. They did a beautiful job with it. I was really happy. Yeah.
Yes, that's good. But look, thank you ever so much, Adele. And
Thank you.
have a lovely day. And I hope
You too.
take care. See you later.
Such an enjoyable conversation. See ya.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
And that, dear listener, is the end of the conversation. That's me with in conversation with Adele Bertei, talking about her new book, Twisted, which is available from all good bookshops and also online on Z Books. Also, do check out Why Labelle Matters, which is a book about Patti Labelle and the Bluebelles. And yes, she's got a new single out, which is all on streaming services and probably Bandcamp, but she might not be. So I might have made that up. Anyway, massive thank you to Adele for giving me the time for that. This has been the C86 Show, David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, you can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just do C86 Show. And these have all been archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. It's true. Anyway, have a great week. Stay safe.